Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and there was a conversation that started a couple weeks ago in my comment section that had me thinking about this topic, and I realized I needed to make a video on it. Uh, so it was someone saying, hey, I feel like we need more lifts in a sport like powerlifting. You say that they're a great judge of strength, but it doesn't judge everything. And I had people suggesting that we do a 4 lift meet, a 5 lift meet, right, where you add overhead press or chin ups or other things. And here's the issue that we have with this. Here's the issue we have with this. And I'll get to that in a minute. Powerlifting as it already stands already works for the intended purpose. You'll say, what do you mean? The purpose of judging your overall strength through your body. Right, these are very, very low skill exercises. Yes, skill matters, technique matters. They can help you some. But you're not going to increase a max lift 20% by having good form or amazing technique versus just potatoing the weight up. And people need to understand that. If you can perform a basic squat, a basic conventional deadlift, sumo's a little more technical, a basic bench press, your overall strength through your body is pretty much going to determine what you lift. Now, it's close enough at this point that there was a study looking at strength versus size and some of the data they had from DEXA scans where I saw Menno Henselman actually say, and again, he's a researcher with good credentials, and he's essentially right, that once people get out of their novice phase when they're actually peaked for a powerlifting meet, in other words, people who train maxes, you can pretty much plug in a DEXA scan and determine how they're going to place. You could literally take the lineup for an entire weight class, run a DEXA scan on them and see how much lean tissue they have, because the fat doesn't help you lift more for the most part, how much lean tissue they have versus the amount of height they have relative to it, and you can actually determine roughly what their total is going to be. In other words, you know how they're going to place. He actually said jokingly, although again, a researcher who doesn't compete would think this way, that you could pretty much just do a DEXA scan and send everybody home and not have everybody lift, and you already know who's probably the strongest. He's basically right. He's basically right. But you have to factor in that obviously there's going to be psychology, mindset, people who've peaked correctly, things like that. That stuff still matters, and therefore it's still a contest. But essentially it's just a judgment of, do you know how to perform the lifts and how much muscle do you have relative to your height. And the 3 lifts that are there already spread the muscle out very well. The squat, literally lower body dominant. Your lower body determines almost all of it. Upper body does count some. Anyone arguing otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. It's a little bit of upper body, mostly lower body. And it seems to be heavily correlated with muscle mass in DEXA scans, particularly lower body mass. All right, the bench press, everything is reversed. It's upper body muscle mass. Now, it's not spread through the whole upper body. I mean, having bigger lats, having bigger biceps, all that stuff can add a small amount to your bench. But a guy who has monstrous big pecs and massive triceps is going to have a big bench if he practices benching heavy, even if he's at a light body weight. Because the muscle's relatively specific, but it is just a judge of muscle mass in the upper body. It really is. It's just some contribute more than others. All right, so these two are judges of upper body and lower body muscle mass. That is what determines who's best at them. The deadlift will measure your grip. It's a balanced upper to lower, and it will tell you, it'll measure your leverages. Right? And it will balance leverages out that maybe change stuff in the squat and the bench press. In other words, a guy with really long arms is going to be terrible at benching, but he'll be much, much, much better at deadlifts. And so on and so forth. It balances everything out between the 2 lifts, and it's evenly balanced between upper and lower body, and oftentimes a lot of the muscles that don't get fully assessed with the other 2. Now, in terms of just pure brute strength from a size and strength perspective, from a size perspective, particularly the bench and the squat tell you everything. Deadlift is more leverage oriented, but it also measures grip. It's the one that tells us grip, and grip is an important component of overall strength. And everybody knows this who's been in any sort of strength sport, or the strength world in general. Grip is important, so it measures that. Arguably, the only thing not measured is biceps. So if anything, if you wanted to add a fourth power lift because you think some muscle is not being measured through the body with the big three, even though they are, it would need to be biceps. Well, here's your problem. Adding a fourth event, one that has actually a fairly high injury rate, and would contribute very little to the total. Now, people would say, well, since it's such a tiny muscle, and the biceps are a tiny muscle, even on a guy with 20-inch arms, his biceps are smaller than most of the other muscles. People just don't realize it because they're hanging out of the shirt sleeves. They're fairly small muscle. Even the triceps are bigger on your arm. More muscle mass there. So you could add that in, but it would add very, very little to the total, and it shouldn't add much to the total, and it's going to extend a meet out possibly an entire day just to squeeze that many athletes in. Basically, you're taking a simple meet, which can already run long enough, and you know what guys do? There's already push-pull meets just to cut time and setup, so they don't have to set up a squat rack. There's push-pull meets. And that's what people need to understand. It's not like people want to do meets this long. So oftentimes there are push-pull meets because there's less equipment to set up, less time to set up. You only have to do 2 lifts. Why do you think that is? This is a lot of work adding a third lift. At a big meet, adding a third lift means you've got to separate lifters out. That's why I've been at meets that take 3 days for a big meet where a lot of people are there. It can take 3 days to get all the flights done, even though you might only squat, bench, and deadlift in the same day. It might take 3 days to do that full meet. The same number of people, if we cut it down to 2 lifts, could be done in 2 days, plus equipment. So people are talking about adding extra lifts. These are obviously people who don't compete in anything. These are people who watch the internet and come up with hypothetical things who've never been to real events. Don't spend a lot of time there. It's a pain. And you're not measuring anything else. So let's come over. What do people think they're going to get out of the press? Well, a lot of people feel like because the bench press is all upper body, it shouldn't be used as a test of strength. That's the biggest point about the press and the traditional nature of the exercise. It's a lower lift. It adds less to your total. At least the bench is a upper body lift to where a strong person can add a lot of weight. Well, if we're trying to determine who's overall strongest, we need to be looking at exercises that add significantly to your total. All right, the press doesn't add much. So if you do it on its own, it becomes a lower body dominant contest by default. At least with the flat benching, you have one exercise that your upper body is going to limit it. It's going to matter some. Upper body will count some. Go to the press, that goes away because it's a smaller total. And if you're adding it as a fourth exercise, are people really talking about doing a max overhead press 3 attempts after you've had to bench already? You understand how ludicrous that is? That our injury risks start going up? Because people need to understand that. People don't get hurt on 1 rep maxes very often. Only extreme fatigue. Well, adding a fourth lift, particularly a fourth lift that hits the same muscles as one of the others, taken to an all-out competition psyched up max, now our injury risk starts going up. In addition to the fact that we have to add hours and hours and hours of time to a meet, and it has to be set up and judged in manpower. All right, that doesn't make sense. It is still the same muscles being used, just a little bit less of them. What about the chin-up? People say, well, I have the chin-ups. Just so you can measure biceps? Lats and grip are already tested with the deadlift. Why do you need the chin-up? The only reason to add the chin-up in is because people want more upper body measurements so they can be more bro. Right? They want to be able to add more upper body measurement to be more bro. But really all it does is add biceps. All those same muscles are worked on the other lifts already. Your back strength and your grip are already tested on the deadlift. Why do you need the chins thrown in? Again, let's come back over to the same point. An all-out competition 3 attempt max on a chin-up after having maxed on deadlifts, I think our risk of bicep tear starts going up. And we have to set it up, and it's a harder lift to judge. It's more ambiguous in a lot of ways. It's harder to judge a chin-up. And that is the problem with all of this stuff. That's the problem with these adding extra lifts. All right, powerlifting would possibly be more popular if we took one out and did just push-pull. I don't like that though because it would de-emphasize lower body strength. Right, it would de-emphasize it to a large extent. When you do a push-pull, it becomes slightly more upper body dominant. And I put a lot of work into making my legs strong, as most athletes do. So I don't like the push-pulls as much myself for that reason. I don't like them as much for that reason, but that would, if anything, if you wanted to make powerlifting more popular, you could just make it a deadlift contest, honestly. I mean, the push-pulls work. They draw a big crowd because they're shorter. People get more excited about these lifts and it's easier to set up. When you start talking about adding additional lifts, you are talking about a degree of complexity, manpower, time, expense to host a meet that serves no benefit other than to fit your personal ego of thinking that these big three don't measure enough in terms of strength. That's the only reason. It's silly. It's silly. And the amount of work and the officials and money involved, because they have to have facilities. They have to have staff. Right? You got to pay these people a little bit sometimes, the spotters and things. Like, it's expensive. Every day of a meet adds up to cost. Well, who's going to pay for all this? Because you're not going to get as many people attend. I can tell you right now, fewer people are going to pay entry fees and show up to an event, unless it's just an ego thing. A bunch of YouTubers decide to host a 5-lift meet together. But that's not going to be real athletes per se. Less people are going to want to show up because nobody wants to peak on 4 or 5 different exercises for one event. Nobody wants to do that. My point on that is irrelevant regarding the peaking because I'm not a big believer in the peaking concept. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I just think that people should lift heavy year round. But that aside, most people do believe in that. Most people do train that way. Nobody wants to peak on 4 or 5 exercises. You're not going to get a good turnout. It's not going to work, and it doesn't add anything to the sport. It just increases risk of injury and makes meets more expensive and more time consuming to set up. It's not going to work. And I know people love to talk about this all the time on the internet, but it's simply not going to work. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.